Have you ever been invisible in your own family, not because you did anything wrong, but because someone else was always more important? My name is Jennifer, and for 22 years, I watched my parents worship my younger brother while treating me like I was nothing more than a bank account. But on his 20th birthday, when they demanded I hand over $50,000 from my trust fund to buy him a BMW, I finally said no. That single word sent me to the emergency room and changed my family forever. Growing up, I learned early that love in my family was not equally distributed. My brother Ryan was the golden child from the moment he was born. He could do no wrong. When he failed classes, it was the teacher's fault. When he crashed my mother's car at 17, they bought him his own the next week. When he got fired from 3 jobs in a row, my parents said the managers did not appreciate his talent. Ryan lived in a bubble where consequences did not exist, and everything he wanted magically appeared. I was different. I was the responsible one, the one who had to earn everything. I worked part-time jobs since I was 15. I paid for my own college expenses, even though my parents could have helped. I graduated with honors while working full-time and moved into my own apartment at 21. My parents barely acknowledged any of it. At my college graduation, my mother spent the entire ceremony on the phone coordinating Ryan's high school prom after-party. That was my normal. That was what I had learned to accept. But there was one thing that was mine and mine alone. My grandmother, my father's mother, had never liked how my parents treated me. She saw the favoritism, the inequality, the way I was expected to be an adult while Ryan was coddled like a child. Before she passed away when I was 18, she set up a trust fund specifically for me. It was not a fortune, but it was substantial. Around $200,000 that would become fully accessible when I turned 25. Until then, I could access it only for specific purposes like education, medical emergencies, or starting a business, and only with approval from the trustee, a lawyer named Mr. Harrison, who had been my grandmother's friend for decades. My parents hated that trust fund. They hated that there was money they could not control, money they could not redirect to Ryan. They had tried multiple times over the years to convince me to use it for family expenses. They wanted me to pay for Ryan's college when he barely attended classes. They wanted me to fund a business idea Ryan had that made no sense. They wanted me to use it for a family vacation that somehow always centered around what Ryan wanted to do. Each time I said no. Each time they made me feel selfish and ungrateful. But I held firm because I knew that money was my future, my security, my grandmother's final gift to me. Ryan's 20th birthday was approaching, and my parents had been planning it for months like it was a royal coronation. There was going to be a huge party at an expensive venue. They had hired a DJ, a catering company, and even rented luxury cars for photos. The guest list was over 100 people. My mother talked about nothing else for weeks. She showed me the decorations, the menu, the schedule of events. She never once asked if I was coming or if I wanted to help plan. I was just expected to show up and smile while Ryan was celebrated yet again. 2 weeks before the party, my parents invited me to dinner at their house. I should have known something was wrong. They never invited me over unless they wanted something. When I arrived, Ryan was not there. It was just my parents sitting in the living room with serious expressions on their faces. My father told me to sit down. My mother had that look she always got when she was about to ask me for something and pretend it was for my own good. My father started talking about how Ryan was becoming a man, how he needed to learn responsibility and independence. I almost laughed at that. Ryan had never been responsible for anything in his life. But I stayed quiet and listened. Then my mother said they had been thinking about what to get Ryan for his 20th birthday, something meaningful that would help him grow up. She said they wanted to buy him a car, not just any car, but a BMW. Something nice that he would take pride in and take care of. Something that showed they believed in him. I did not understand why they were telling me this until my father said the number, $50,000. They wanted to buy Ryan a $50,000 BMW for his 20th birthday. I sat there in shock. $50,000 for someone who had crashed 2 cars already, who had no job, who was barely passing community college. It was insane, but then my mother said the part that made my blood run cold. She said they did not have $50,000 available right now because they had spent so much on the party and other expenses. So they wanted me to take it from my trust fund and give it to them for the car. I stared at my parents, waiting for them to laugh and say it was a joke, but they were completely serious. My mother even had a folder with printouts of BMW they had been looking at. She showed me pictures like I was supposed to be excited about this. My father talked about how this was a family investment, how helping Ryan now would benefit all of us later when he became successful. They had it all planned out. They had already picked the car. They had already promised it to Ryan. They just needed me to hand over the money. I took a deep breath and said no. I said it calmly and clearly. I told them that my trust fund was for my future, for my education and my life, not for buying luxury cars for Ryan. I reminded them that I could not even access that much money without approval from Mr. Harrison, and there was no way he would approve $50,000 for a car for my brother. I told them this was not reasonable, and they needed to find another solution. The room went silent. Then my father's face turned red. He started yelling about how selfish I was, how I had always been jealous of Ryan, how I could not stand to see him happy. My mother started crying, saying I was tearing the family apart, that my grandmother would be ashamed of me for not helping my own brother. They tag-teamed me with guilt and anger for almost an hour. Every old resentment came out. Every time I had said no to them in the past was thrown in my face. I tried to stay calm. I tried to explain again that this was not about Ryan. It was about my future and my security. I told them $50,000 was an enormous amount of money for a car for someone who was 20 years old and had no income. I suggested they buy Ryan a reasonable used car instead, something he could actually afford to maintain and insure. But they did not want to hear it. To them, anything less than the BMW was an insult to Ryan, a sign that they did not believe in him. When I refused to change my mind, my father made a threat. He said if I did not give them the money, I was no longer welcome in their home. He said I could forget about being part of the family. My mother added that I would not be invited to Ryan's birthday party, that I would be cut off completely. They actually believed this threat would work, that the fear of losing them would make me hand over $50,000. They had no idea that being cut off from this toxic dynamic might actually be a relief. I stood up to leave. I told them I loved them, but I was not giving them my trust fund money for a car. I told them they were being unreasonable and manipulative, and I hoped they would calm down and realize that. As I walked toward the door, my mother grabbed my arm and begged me to reconsider. She said Ryan had his heart set on this car, that they had already told him it was happening. She said I was going to ruin his birthday and disappoint him. I pulled my arm away gently and said that was not my responsibility. I said they should not have promised something they could not afford. Then I left. Over the next week, the calls and texts did not stop. My parents called me every day, sometimes multiple times. They sent long text messages about family loyalty and sacrifice. They had Ryan call me too, which was somehow worse. Ryan did not even really ask. He just assumed I would give them the money. He talked about the car like it was already his, which color he wanted, what features he was excited about. When I told him I was not giving them the money, he called me selfish and hung up on me. My aunts and uncles started calling too. My parents had told the whole family their version of the story, painting me as the cruel daughter who refused to help her struggling brother. I blocked most of their numbers. I told myself I was doing the right thing, but the guilt was eating at me. I had been trained my entire life to put Ryan first, to sacrifice for the family, to make my parents happy. Saying no felt like I was breaking some fundamental rule. I called Mr. Harrison, my trust fund lawyer, and told him what was happening. He was not surprised. He said my grandmother had warned him this might happen someday. He told me under no circumstances would he approve a $50,000 withdrawal for a car for my brother, and even if I begged him to, he would refuse because it was his job to protect that money for my future. Hearing him say that made me feel less alone. The day before Ryan's birthday party, my mother called from a number I had not blocked. She was crying hysterically. She said I had ruined everything, that Ryan was devastated, that the whole family was talking about what a terrible person I was. She said I had one last chance to fix this. If I came to the house that evening, we could all sit down and work something out like adults. She promised they would not yell or pressure me. She said they just wanted to talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I wanted to believe my family could be reasonable. I wanted to believe we could find some middle ground. I arrived at my parents' house that evening around 7. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. My father was pacing in the living room. My mother was wringing her hands. Ryan was there too, sitting on the couch with his arms crossed and a look of entitlement on his face that made me want to turn around and leave. But I had come this far, so I sat down and waited for someone to speak. My father started. He said they had thought about what I said, and they understood I had concerns. He said they were willing to compromise. Instead of $50,000, they would only need $40,000. As if $10,000 less made it reasonable. I shook my head and said no. I was not giving them any amount of money for a car for Ryan. That was not a compromise. That was still them demanding access to my trust fund for something completely unnecessary. Ryan exploded. He stood up and started screaming at me about how I had always hated him, how I was jealous because our parents loved him more, how I was a miserable person who could not stand to see him succeed. I stayed seated and quiet, which only made him angrier. He called me names I will not repeat. He said I was dead to him. My parents did not stop him. They just watched. When he was done screaming, he stormed out of the room and slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall. My mother started her part. She used the soft voice, the victim voice. She talked about how hard they had worked to give us good lives. She said they had sacrificed everything for us kids, and now when they asked for one thing, I could not help them. She said my grandmother would be ashamed of how selfish I had become. She cried and said she did not even recognize me anymore, that I had changed into someone cold and heartless. It was a performance I had seen before, designed to make me feel like a monster for having boundaries. I told them again, as calmly as I could, that I was not giving them money from my trust fund. I told them this conversation was over and I was leaving. I stood up and grabbed my purse. That was when my father stepped in front of the door and told me I was not leaving until I agreed to help Ryan. His voice was low and threatening in a way I had never heard before. I told him to move. He did not. He said I was going to sit back down and we were going to keep talking until I saw a reason. I felt my heart start racing. I pulled out my phone and said if he did not move, I was calling the police. My mother gasped like I had threatened to kill someone. She said I was being dramatic, that we were just talking, that there was no need to involve anyone else. But my father still did not move. He said I owed this family, that everything I had was because of them, and I was going to give Ryan what he deserved. I started dialing. My hand was shaking, but I was not backing down. That was when Ryan came back into the room. I did not see what he was holding at first. Everything happened so fast. He was yelling something about how I had ruined his life. He pushed my father out of the way and came at me. I dropped my phone and tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. He shoved me hard and I fell backward into the coffee table. I heard something crack. I did not know if it was the table or me. Pain shot through my back and my head hit something hard. The next few minutes were a blur. I remember lying on the floor trying to breathe. I remember my mother screaming. I remember Ryan standing over me looking shocked, like he had not meant for it to go that far. I remember my father yelling at him to go to his room, like he was a child who had broken a vase instead of a grown man who had just assaulted his sister. I tried to sit up, but the pain in my back was so intense I could barely move. I managed to reach my phone and dial 911 before my vision started going dark around the edges. I do not remember the ambulance ride. I woke up in the emergency room with a nurse checking my blood pressure and a doctor shining a light in my eyes. They asked me what happened. I told them I fell. I do not know why I lied. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was years of protecting my family's image. Maybe it was shock. They did not believe me. They said my injuries were not consistent with a simple fall. I had a concussion, 2 bruised ribs, and a deep cut on the back of my head that needed stitches. They asked me again what really happened. I started crying and told them the truth. The hospital called the police. I gave a statement from my hospital bed, my head pounding and my ribs aching with every breath. I told them everything, the months of pressure, the threats, the physical confrontation. I told them about Ryan pushing me, about my parents blocking the door, about how terrified I had felt in my own family's home. The officers took notes and asked if I wanted to press charges. I hesitated. Pressing charges against my own brother felt impossible, but then I thought about what Mr. Harrison had said about protecting myself and my future. I said yes. While I was still in the ER, my phone would not stop buzzing. My parents were calling over and over. I finally answered and immediately regretted it. My mother was hysterical, begging me not to talk to the police, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that Ryan did not mean to hurt me. My father got on the phone and threatened me. He said if I pressed charges against Ryan, I would destroy his future. He said I would be responsible for ruining his life. I told him Ryan was responsible for his own actions, and I hung up. The next call was from Mr. Harrison. Somehow he had already heard what happened. He said he was coming to the hospital immediately. When he arrived an hour later, he did not just come as my trust fund lawyer. He came with another attorney, a woman named Ms. Chen, who specialized in family law and restraining orders. They sat with me while I gave another statement. They helped me understand my rights and my options. Mr. Harrison told me something I will never forget. He said my grandmother had included a clause in the trust specifically for situations like this. If my family ever tried to coerce, threaten, or harm me to access the trust funds, they would be permanently barred from any claim to that money, and the trust would immediately come fully under my control regardless of my age. Ms. Chen helped me file for a restraining order against Ryan and a separate order of protection against my parents for their role in trapping me in that house. She said what they did was not just morally wrong, it was legally wrong. Blocking someone from leaving, threatening them, creating an environment where assault occurred, these were serious issues. Over the next few days, while I recovered at a friend's apartment because I was too afraid to go home alone, the legal process moved forward. Ryan was arrested and charged with assault. My parents were not charged criminally, but the restraining orders were granted. They were not allowed to contact me in any way. The family erupted in chaos. My extended family members who had been calling me selfish suddenly went quiet when they learned what actually happened. Some of them reached out to apologize. Others doubled down, saying I should have just given Ryan the money and none of this would have happened. I blocked those people permanently. The worst part was not the physical pain or even the legal process. It was the grief. I grieved the family I had always wanted but never actually had. I grieved the fantasy that maybe someday my parents would see me as more than a resource. I grieved the relationship with my brother that had never really existed because he had been raised to believe he deserved everything and I deserved nothing. That grief was harder than the bruises and the concussion. But something else happened too. I started to feel free. For the first time in my life, I was not carrying the weight of their expectations and their demands. I was not spending emotional energy trying to earn love that was never going to be equally given. I was not sacrificing my future for people who saw me as an obligation rather than a daughter and sister. The trust fund that my grandmother had left me became fully accessible under the protection clause. I used some of it to pay for therapy, which I desperately needed. I used some to finish my graduate degree. I used some to move to a new apartment in a different part of the city where I felt safe. Ryan's assault charge was eventually reduced to a misdemeanor with probation and anger management classes as part of a plea deal. I did not fight it. I did not want revenge. I just wanted him to face some consequence for his actions, something our parents had never made him do. My parents tried multiple times to reach me through other family members, sending messages about how I had torn the family apart, how I needed to drop the restraining orders so we could heal. I never responded. Healing to them meant me pretending nothing happened and going back to being their personal ATM. That was never going to happen. About 6 months after the incident, I got a letter from my mother. It came through her lawyer, so it did not violate the restraining order. It was not an apology. It was a justification. She wrote about how stressful Ryan's birthday planning had been, how they were just trying to do something nice for their son, how I had escalated everything by being stubborn. She said families were supposed to help each other, and I had failed at that. She ended the letter by saying the door was always open if I wanted to come back and make things right. I read it once and then threw it away. There was nothing to make right. I had protected myself. That was not something that needed fixing. Today, almost a year later, I am doing better than I ever thought possible. I am finishing my master's degree in social work, ironically specializing in family trauma and dysfunction. I have friends who feel more like family than my actual relatives ever did. I have a therapist who has helped me understand that what I experienced was not normal family conflict. It was abuse and financial exploitation. I have boundaries now, real ones, and I do not feel guilty about enforcing them. The trust fund my grandmother left me is being used exactly as she intended, to build a life for myself that is stable and independent and free from people who see me as a means to an end. I do not know if my parents ever bought Ryan that BMW. I do not know if he learned anything from what happened. I do not know if they tell people the truth about why I am not in their lives anymore, or if they have created some story where I am the villain. I do not spend time wondering about those things anymore. What I do know is this: saying no to them was the hardest and best thing I ever did. That one word, the word they could not accept, was the beginning of my real life. The moral of this story is not about money, though money was the weapon my family used. It is about knowing your worth and protecting it, even when the people who are supposed to love you are the ones threatening it. It is about understanding that family is not an excuse for abuse, and loyalty does not mean sacrificing yourself on the altar of someone else's entitlement. It is about the moment when you realize that walking away from toxicity is not abandonment, it is survival. My parents demanded I buy my brother a BMW. I refused and ended up in the ER, but that night in the emergency room was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a life where I matter, where my boundaries are respected, where I am more than a resource to be drained. And no $50,000 car, no family approval, no amount of guilt could ever be worth more than that. If you are watching this and you see yourself in my story, please know this: you are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not cruel for having boundaries. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep people warm, even if those people are family. Stand up for yourself. Say no when you need to. And never let anyone make you believe that your safety and future are less important than their wants.